Hello, everyone. All right, welcome. So good to see so many of you here tonight for our Gospel and Culture Night. First one since pre-COVID, so that's exciting. Yeah. There's people joining us online as well, so welcome to those joining us online. Special request from Armidale to live stream this. You can guess who in Armidale asked for that, but hello to our friend in Armidale and everyone else who's online. It's great to be here together tonight. If you haven't been to a Gospel and Culture Night before, Gospel and Culture Nights are just an opportunity for us as a young adult community just to dig into God's Word and think about what it means for our whole lives. We believe that living as a Christian doesn't just mean church on a Sunday, Bible study on a Tuesday, tick, we're done, but actually that the gospel transforms and changes all parts of our lives, even sport. And so we have Stephen and Susie here today, they're going to interview one another, share a little bit about their experiences and the things that they've thought through in this area. And whether you are very, very sporty or slightly sporty or consider yourself not sporty at all, it will be helpful, I'm sure, to think about.
Good.
That's my introduction.
Well, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be here. My name's Stephen Liggins. I work as an Anglican minister up in the Blue Mountains at Anglican Church of Springwood. I know Tim, your senior assistant minister. I know Eric, who's a very important member of the congregation and works with MTS. And this is...
Hi, I'm Susie, and Susie Harris here, Susie Arthur these days.
But we're going under the Harris name because...
Going under the Harris name.
As you'll find out in a minute, I was a fairly good sports person and played at a reasonably good level, but Susie played for Australia and the Australian women's hockey team from about 2002 to 2006, and that was before she was married under the name Harris, so tonight we're going to call you Susie Harris.
Yep.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. Well, what the plan for tonight is, we're going to think about the topic of sport and Christianity. And the way we're going to do it is I'm going to interview Susie a bit about her sport and about her faith. And then after we've done that for a while, we'll throw open to questions from the floor and you can ask her anything you like. And then after about maybe 30 minutes or so, we'll have a half-time break, stretch our legs. You can run up to the plaza and get a drink or whatever you normally do. And then after that, Susie's going to interview me about a book which I wrote on the topic of sport and Christianity called The Good Sporting Life. It was published by Matthias Media last year. She's going to talk to me about that, and then we'll throw open to questions from the floor, and that's roughly where we're going. So you've got the idea, sort of, we've got a first half and a second half with a half-time break, so that's very sporting itself, isn't it?
I'm going to win.
Sorry? Okay, as I said, Susie represented Australia for hockey from 2002 to 2006. She played for the country. I think if you've got your hand out there, can anyone tell me how many times she played for Australia? There we go, I've got it. 47, 8 goals, etc., etc. Now, these days, married to Daniel, 2 children. Yep. Good?
Sorry, 2 girls, yep.
Now, anyone who plays sport knows we've got to warm up first, so I thought I'd ask her a few quick warm-up questions just to sort of get to know her a bit. What was the name of your first hockey team?
Ooh, the Blaxland Rovers.
Based in Blaxland,
Based in Blaxland.
Lower Blue Mountains.
Yep, that's
now, do you remember your first ever hockey game?
I remember that it was on grass back in the day, and I think I would have been 5 or 6 or something. So I do have a vivid memory of everyone on the sidelines screaming for whoever was with the ball to go the opposite direction, which I think quite common in, little kids' sport. I don't think it was me. It may have been me, but hopefully not.
Yep. Now, we know that hockey is a winter sport. Mm-hmm. Were you playing all sorts of other sports growing up? What were you playing in summer and elsewhere?
Look, I did a little bit of little A's, a little bit of tennis and bits and pieces, but it was mostly hockey and, I don't know, all the school athletics and sports that went along with that.
Okay. Now, as a sports player, also a sports watcher, what's the most exciting sporting event you've ever watched?
Well, this will show my age for some of you, but the Sydney Olympics was a bit of a highlight for me, and I realised a few years ago teaching that I had all these students that weren't alive then, which was a bit humbling. But you'll be all right with that.
James would have been alive then, wouldn't he?
James.
Where's James? Where's he gone? Yeah.
There he is.
Were you alive in 2000? Yeah, there we go.
There you
So
go.
just, yeah.
So I do remember the 2000. I was a ball girl for the hockey and watched the Hockeyroos win the gold medal. So that was probably really a highlight for me, right being on the sideline there.
So you're a ball girl to see the Hockeyroos win at the Olympics in 2000.
Yes. Yes.
Did you suspect that 2 years later you'd be in the team?
No.
We'll hear a bit more about that shortly.
Yeah.
Now, probably most of us don't know that much about the finer points of hockey, but who's the best hockey player you played with or against, and why was she so good?
I think probably there was a few Australians, but I'll pick out the Argentinian Luciana Aymar, who was World Player of the Year for many years running, and I played against her quite a few times. There's actually a Netflix documentary on her at the moment. But she was incredible, had incredible speed and skill, and as an attacking midfielder was just brilliant at creating space and play, and yeah, led her team to a lot of great success. But yeah, so she was very exciting to play against, and I guess humbling to play against someone who's really brilliant as well.
Yeah. Now, I'm just coming up to now. Can you tell us, what was the family like in which you grew up, and what's your family like now?
So I grew up in the mountains. I'm one of 5 girls, smack bang in the middle. And I grew up in a Christian home, which I was very blessed to be a part of. And my parents, raised me to know and serve the Lord Jesus as my Lord and Saviour. And I'm not sure what about it. So my sisters are all around the globe at the moment, and I have one is still in the country, and my parents are still in the mountains, but they're all pursuing all sorts of different things. Any more specificity?
What about your family now? Tell us about your current family.
So my husband Daniel is he's actually an Anglican minister by training, and a teacher, and was a mechanic. So he's had a few different backgrounds, but he's working for Church Missionary Society at the moment, which is a missionary organisation. And then I have 2 young girls who are 5 and just about 2, Evelyn and Joy, and they occupy a lot of my time because of their mum.
Okay, perhaps going into a little bit more depth with a few questions now. You said you were a ball girl at the final for the 2000 Olympics, watching the Australian women's hockey team win the gold medal. Then I've seen footage of you playing hockey for Australia when you were 17 years old, and I believe you were still at school and you had to get permission from your school principal to get out of school and go and play for Australia. Yeah. What was it like for a Year 12 student
Year
to
11,
be
actually.
plucked from school? Year 11?
Yeah.
Year 11 student, there we go. What was it like to be a Year 11 student, plucked out of school, and you're going to play with a powerful Australian women's hockey? What did it feel like? What do you remember about it?
Yeah, oh look, it was a bit surreal. I remember getting the call in the kitchen after I think I'd been away at a few training camps and things with the national sort of broader squad, and then getting the call that I had actually made the team was a bit out of nowhere because I hadn't actually played for the Open New South Wales team yet, so it was a bit of a shock selection, but it was very exciting to actually be a Hockeyaroo. That was something that I had dreamt on for many years, so it was a bit surreal. It meant I wasn't at school for a little bit, but that was okay. I had a lot of support, but I still remember the moment and where I was and everything.
Do you remember
like
the being on the field for the game?
Oh, at the actual World Cup? Yes, I do. I remember, I don't know, you remember little bits and pieces. I remember the anthem. I remember warming up to Beyonce on the overhead, things like that you remember that they had on the speakers. And I remember playing, I especially remember playing against England because they had a big Barmy Army supporters crowd there screaming and a lot of Australian supporters too, and just the thrill of playing for your country and having a big crowd, and obviously being a new player and part of the team was exciting in its own way. So yeah.
Now, obviously, I'm really into sport. I'm sure many people here are, and everyone would love to play for their country and their sport. You got there at the age of 17, which is a bit of a prodigy type situation. What factors do you think combined to get you into the Australian team? What was how did it happen?
Yeah, good question. I think one of the things, I was coached a lot by my dad, who was a bit of a sports mad fan and who had, he was a really good coach in the way that he could see things that differentiated a player from others. So he taught me very early on to have, in hockey in particular, really close skills to go along with attacking and speed. So they were things I kind of had naturally, and then to really work and refine those skills meant that I stood out at an earlier age, I think, than some people. So I guess that was one thing. In saying that, I think there's so many things that come together at the moment. They were looking for new talent, they were looking for new strikers.
So you're a forward, you're an attacking player?
Yeah. So, and I think, it's a hard question to answer. I think the Lord's providence had a bit of a hand in that, but I think those are the main things that I kind of.
Okay, now, so you played for the Australian team for about five or so years.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the highlights of playing for your country?
I think, like I said, being on a field and playing and having an amazing crowd or listening to the anthem is always something that you can't quite prepare for in a way, but then when you're there in another country and there's all these other anthems playing and yours is played with the flag is quite inspiring and quite, I guess, humbling, but it reminds you of your own country and that you are proud of your country. I think some of the other things that were wonderful was I did a lot of travel over those years. I saw so much of the world, Europe and America and Asia, and that was just all sort of part of the gig, which was one of the things I really loved about it. A lot of hotels and airports and hockey fields, but there was a lot of other great travelling in between there. So I think that was something I took away that I really valued as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what we're thinking tonight about, I guess, sport, but also Christianity. You're a hockey player, you were a hockey player, but more importantly, you're a Christian. Could you tell us a bit about, I know you grew up in a church-going family, Christian home. How did you make a commitment to Christ? What would your testimony be?
Yeah, I think as some of you who may have grown up in a Christian home would know that, or have experienced similarly, that it wasn't necessarily a flash moment. I think I grew up always knowing that Jesus loved me and that he died for me and saved me, and that he was always there for me and that I could always speak to him. But it wasn't until I guess I was about 14 when I remember being confirmed that I had to start to think about some of the questions and what it would mean for me as a Christian. And for many of you, you may have found it similarly, that I think when you sort of hit high school, you start to have to make decisions and choices that might set you apart from others, and that's when some of those questions really start to become real, or the things that you've always known start to become reality, because you have to choose a narrow way and a way that isn't always in the crowd, because so I think that's where it really became real for me in high school and middle and later high school, where those challenges pop up.
Yeah. So you said at about the age of 14 you're starting to commit your life to Christ. 3 years later you're playing for Australia. You're suddenly away from home a lot.
Yeah.
You're circulating with women who are probably a few years older than you. Very high-powered sporting environment, a lot of strong influences there of various sorts. How did your Christian life go as a 17-year-old, moving away from home, playing in this very high-powered sporting environment? What did it do to your faith, and what helped you?
Yeah, I think maybe those years before had prepared me a little bit for the reality that I had to be set apart, or I wasn't the same as everyone. And I think that's something that as a Christian, there's an identity there that means that you're not always going to just fit in as easily. In saying that, I had wonderful friendships with all the people in my team. But some of the things that helped me was knowing that my walk with the Lord was dependent on my relationship with him, and the way in which, so for me, growing up knowing that reading my Bible and prayer and walking with him was the most important thing, so that they were, I guess, landmarks that I could come back to each day when I was away on tour or living overseas or living interstate. Having my Bible there and my sort of devotional that I could come back to each day was really important. And I think the first thing I thought when you said was a lot of grace, a lot of prayer. I think that my parents and other Christians held me through, and a lot of wise people around me and Christians around me outside of the hockey world who could give me advice and things on the decisions I would make. And
Right.
sorry.
Can I just jump in there for a minute?
Yeah.
So can you tell us some of the ways your parents helped you when you were away?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the key things I think when I was 18, 19 and I had to move to Perth where the AIS for hockey was for that Olympic year, was that I know that rather than just put me, you had to find housing and things, and rather just than living with lots of other teammates, and because there's the men's hockey and the women's hockey and it's all very interconnected, they ensured that we had sort of some Christian family friends that I would live with and right near the hockey, and they kind of had pursued that to find so that I would have almost like a safe space away from the culture and the world of it all. And that wasn't a weird thing by any means. Lots of people lived alone, but it just meant that I had some people who were not intrusive, but who were there and who were supporters, who were also Christians in that world. So that was one thing. Another thing that they did was them and all my sisters would write me letters whenever I went on tour, and letters of encouragement. And
This is before emails, big.
yeah, but I have a bit of a literary family in the sense that we would still write letters because
Right.
there's something about the handwritten note. But just with and even my dad as my coach was sort of spiritual advice as well, was integrated with his coaching tips and things.
Yeah. So basically, you got moved out of your comfort zone with your family and your home church. You got transplanted to Perth, but you kept your devotional life happening. You got into Christian fellowship, and people were keeping you accountable and stuff, and that worked well.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when we play, so I think we model off people a lot. When you played sport, do you have any particular role models or sporting not idols, but sporting people you looked up to and sort of thought they're a good example of what a Christian sports person should be like?
Yeah, definitely. The one that always stood out for me was a man called Eric Liddell, who some of you may have heard of, or if you've seen an old film called Chariots of Fire.
Can I try a quick survey?
Yeah.
Could you put up your hand if you've seen the movie Chariots of Fire?
Oh, that's devastating. You're going to have to do a screening.
Okay, I think... Yeah,
They're going to have to do a remake or something.
You know, can I say that if the topic of sport and Christianity interests you, Chariots of Fire was made in 1982. It was a really high-class movie. It won a whole lot of awards about this guy called Eric Liddell. I urge you to go out and watch it. It's one of those movies made 40 years ago, which still stands the test of time. And I showed it to my kids the other week, and they thought it was good too.
Oh, that's good.
So there we go.
It felt old when I watched it.
Chariots of Fire. There we go. There's our
It's
first.
still, I think its story rings true. And
Now these guys don't know what the story is.
no, so Eric Liddell was a famous Scottish Olympian, or I guess British in a sense back when it was under the Commonwealth, when they all competed together. And he was a famous runner and a Christian, and I'm trying to give justice to his story. But essentially, so Paris Olympics was his one where he won a few gold medals and things. But essentially, he made some sacrifices along the way, refused to run on a Sunday, which he was a strong Sabbatarian, I think is the word.
So Sabbatarians are people who thought that it was inappropriate to play sport on Sunday.
Yeah, which for different reasons, but he decided that he wasn't back when...
This is the 1920s.
Yeah, they didn't usually have sport on a Sunday. He wasn't going to run in the final that day. And everyone said, that's, unbelievable. How could you sacrifice everything you worked for that? And so unbelievably, he was a sprinter, but unbelievably somehow it switched around and he got to run a final in a different event that wasn't his speciality, 400 metres.
The 400 metres, yep.
And final lane, last lane victory, and he won, which was just unheard of and incredible. And it gives me tingles still thinking about it.
I think it was in a world record time.
Yeah,
as
incredible.
Well.
And he had this way of throwing his head back, I think, that just, he was a very devoted Christian, and he was very open about that, and he spent a lot of his time also preaching, and he ended up becoming a missionary to China in his years after. So I think one of the things that also inspired me about him was the way that he wanted to use his gifts to glorify God, and that he could gain great enjoyment from that and give pleasure to others in seeing the way that God had created him with those gifts and using them for his glory and not hiding away from that at all. But then also that being an element of his life, it wasn't his whole life, that there was something that was beyond that and above that, and then going on to later serve in something that was so unseen, being a missionary out in the middle of China. He died in a concentration camp during the end of the war, and just having those aspects of his life sort of so interconnected and yet very different yeah, it was really inspiring to me and still is a model for me, I think, for all of life, not just for him as a sporting model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I've got quite a few more questions I can still ask Susie, but I thought I might pause for a moment and I'm going to say, does anyone have any questions? But instead of just saying, does anyone have any questions, I'm going to take about 30 seconds to ask the question, does anyone have any questions? And so while I'm actually saying this and sort of stretching it out a bit, that gives you the time to think of whether there are any questions you would like to ask, which is why I'm going on about this at the moment. So in a moment, I'm going to say, does anyone have any questions? I'm wondering, does anyone have any questions they would like to ask at this point?
It's okay.
James, you got one, mate?
Poor James was one of my old English students.
I
I was
thought
a
I'd
teacher.
target- I
I'm
thought
a
I'd
teacher
target
in
him.
another life, so he's been picked out. Well, as many people knowing, women's sport isn't particularly lucrative, so you have to have a backup plan. And you also need to look to the rest of your life. So yes, teaching was something that I always wanted to do, and I went and studied Sydney Uni and became a teacher, and I loved my time. I taught for a few years, for 5 years or 6 years down at Shire Christian School. Yeah, so...
Good.
And
That
I used
was a
to live
really
in the
good
Shire.
question. Would anyone else like to ask anything at this point? Yeah.
Yeah.
Susie, I'm just going to repeat the question because I don't think it's on the live stream. So the question
sorry.
was, did you have any really good conversations with people about your faith during your time at high-level
Yeah.
sport?
Yeah, I think I definitely did. I think being the youngest was an interesting way to come in. So I was 17, obviously, when I got in, and most of the women were at least mid-20s. There was at least a kind of 6-year gap between me and the next person. So that element of youth is something that I guess people don't necessarily look to you for a wise guide of life, because I'm just, beginning, and there was a lot of kind of friendly banter about that element of me being really young. But in saying that, I was really encouraged, I think, by Timothy, who talks about do not be timid about your youth, but be, faithful as well. And there were moments, I think, gradually as I was a bit more of a steady member of the team, when people asked about decisions I'd make or how, I guess some of them could see that hockey wasn't everything to me. So I think for a lot of the women around me, it was everything, and then if they were cut or there was a selection that didn't go their way or whatever it was, or a game that didn't go their way, it was just devastating and their whole world sort of came apart. So I think that was something where people noticed and would ask me about what it was that I guess kept me stable in another way, that it wasn't everything. But yeah, there were definitely conversations towards the end of the latter part of it. They started to be questions related often to sort of morality and choices in those areas, which became tricky, but I had to be kind of faithful and honest. I think those questions have become harder in the public nature in which they are now as well. So, and in sporting worlds, they're very prevalent. So, yeah, you can't go in blind and not prepared to, I guess, I don't want to say be a pariah, but have answers that people won't always love. So, and there were people who really struggled with what they knew were my beliefs on certain things, and so that did create difficulties at some points. But yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yes, there were questions.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions at this point? Yeah.
A chaplain?
Yep. So
No, there wasn't.
sorry. So the question was there a
sorry.
team chaplain or
Chaplain,
pastor?
No, there wasn't in hockey. There were a few people floating around kind of Australian sport that kind of touched. So I think at the time it was more predominant sports. Like I know, the cricket team had a chaplain, and but hockey didn't. There were chaplains though for say Olympic years. So all the teams had counsellors and psychologists and all those sorts of things, but they're more connected to the sort of support staff. But no, there weren't many chaplains. There is a girl I know who's gone into being sort of the Australian chaplaincy, but it is a really needed area, I think, because it's not, there's not many of them. But it's a hard gig to get within a sport as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, was that a... thought you were sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, not hugely. There were a few in my New South Wales sort of team that I played with, and so that was really wonderful. I remember once having a very small Bible study in a hotel floor before a game with a player. But other than that, not hugely. When it came to an international tournament, the Olympics was something where you'd have sort of some organisations and things such as More Than Gold, where they would have kind of tents and Christians would be amongst that. But it was, it wasn't huge. Yeah.
Perhaps I'll ask a couple of questions, and
Yeah.
then we'll have some other questions after that, and then we'll have a break. This isn't scripted, Susie, but was there any aspect of your Christian life which you really found you had to struggle with when you were playing sport? Was there sort of some area you thought, I've really got to be careful here?
I guess like anything, sport, as anything in our world, can become an idol, or it can become something that you pursue, and that's the most important thing, and that and God has to answer your prayers in the way that you want for Him to be faithful to you. And I think something that I struggled with, or that I learnt, and in particular for me, I was in the Athens Olympics squad, and in the final few people, I was sort of the youngest member, and I was cut at the very last minute and sent. So I was in the country, but then I was sent out before I got to go in the village. And for me, that was heartbreaking, as I think a lot of sports people would find. You're in the sort of the final moment, and then you don't get to actually be on the field. And I think for me, it meant that I struggled a lot with, or I really wrestled with God over questions of what was His plan in that. I didn't understand how that could be part of His purpose, or why would that be how it worked out? It just wasn't in the vision of the plan I saw, so why would He have a plan like that? But I see that that He, looking back as time is a wonderful thing, that you can look back and you can see how God works through those struggles you have, or the challenges that you face, that He refines you and He helps you grow through that and helps you understand more about Him through that. So, I think... I'm not sure if that answers your question. One of the things you struggle with, that's an example.
I mean, that would have been a very tough lesson to learn.
Yeah.
Now, we're now probably about 15 years since you finished your hockey career.
Yikes.
A lot has happened with women's sport in the last 10, 15 years. How have you noticed that women's sport has changed in our country?
Yeah, well, I think even in the last 5 years, I feel like it's become far more promoted and advertised and supported. I think financially is a big part of it, through many organisations, I think, wanting to be supportive of women's pursuits in many ways, and women's sport in one of them. So I think there's been a real push for sort of equal acknowledgement and equal pay for women in some sports, which is always going to be a hard thing to get, because it depends on your fan base and your supporters and all those sorts of things. But yeah, it's definitely really been pushed in the last 10 years, which is... one of the wonderful things is, I guess, it gives a lot of role models for young girls coming through to see a healthy and active lifestyle, and the benefits that can come from sport, and the community that can come from that, that they can kind of see as something that they could be a part of. So that's a really positive thing.
I'll ask this next question, and I'll see whether there are any more questions from the floor. But I know that your parents had a big influence on your life and your sport as well. As your children are now getting a little bit older, and they're not far away from potentially playing sport in a few years' time, what sort of things would you like to pass on to your kids when it comes to being sport, and perhaps a Christian and playing sport?
Well, I think for me, one of the most wonderful things about sport are the way in which your character can grow through it in skills that are translatable to all parts of life. So, St. Paul talks about it in the Bible, about how an athlete will prepare and train and persevere. So those ideas of perseverance and diligence, and even humility in how we treat other people and how we play with one another in sport, some of those character traits and the way in which we want to use the gifts God gives us for excellence and for His glory. Those are sorts of the things that I would want my girls to experience, along with the joy that can come from hockey and, well, no, not just hockey. They will be allowed to play other sports, but they will play hockey at some point. The joy of sport in general and of the relationships and communities they can have through that. Yeah.
So before I ask my last question, anyone else like to throw in any questions before I go to that? Yeah. Okay, so the question is, sometimes straight after a game, it might be hard to behave in a Christian way if you haven't perhaps gone that well. In what sort of aspects of sport is it hard to be a Christian? Yep.
And I know you mentioned sort of negativity in there, or like the idea of negativity can be there. I think probably the hardest thing in the culture of sport is post-game sort of celebration more, or drowning of sorrows in another way, so it can kind of go both ways. So I think the culture of sport, which is not very different for a lot of different elements of culture, but the way in which the sporting world can have big problems with sort of alcohol and moral issues or problems, that's a way where you have to quite significantly set apart and be different. So I remember sort of lots of moments of being out. I remember being in the middle of Amsterdam at the end of an international competition which we had won, and there's it was men's and women's international competitions, and being at big sort of parties afterwards and kind of being part of the team, and that was a very normal thing that you all went out and you celebrated together, but that deteriorating very quickly into something that I didn't want to be a part of, and sort of being stranded in the middle of this forest, trying to work out how do I get back to my hotel. So just things like that, just sort of working out, okay, how do I not put myself in situations which are really difficult as a Christian, or so that was one of the challenges, I guess, was trying to be wise about how far you'd let yourself be involved in things without being not a supportive member of the team, those kinds of things. I'm not sure if that...
Anyone else have one more question? Yeah. It's coming from Armidale.
There you go.
Okay, so the question is there any way you felt your faith grew after retiring? You could go to church, etc.
Yeah. No, that's good question. Thank you. I think the key thing for me was being in a community or being in a world where there were very few Christians. For me at that time, I'm not sure if that's all sports, but for me it was that experience. I really, really craved Christian friends who were my age. So I was quite desperate for it by the end, and I just really loved then when I started stepping back and became like a home-based athlete. I took a sort of decision to not live at the AIS, which had some consequences, but it meant that I could study at Sydney Uni, which is what I really had wanted to do, and I became involved in the Evangelical Union there, and I just thrived on actually having Christians around me who I could talk to openly about things, and that was a period for me, those years, where I really grew and was challenged through the teaching and just really saw the value of Christian community, and I guess it made me see how not to take it for granted. When you're on your own a lot and you are separated from that, you realise what a special thing it is that God gives us, His community, to surround us with people who encourage us and keep us on track and sustain us, and so that was hope that answers that.
Okay, perhaps I'll just ask the last question and then we'll have a bit of a break. We're at a meeting of young adult Christians out in the Shire. We're thinking about Christianity and culture, or Christianity and sport. Anything you'd particularly like to pass on?
I guess the key thing out of all of it is that don't neglect your own relationship with the Lord, and don't feel like anyone else is going to do that for you. That is something that you have to spend time with him through in his word and forming your relationship with him and speaking to him through prayer and obviously being a part of a community. But that is what will sustain you throughout the rest of your life and the rest of your walk. So don't neglect that and be prepared. Be prepared that the road has its waves and turns, and you'll, in many parts of it, be on a narrower road than what those around you are, and be brave and courageous to take that road. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, the plan now, I believe, is we're going to have a break of 5 or 10 minutes to stretch your legs, do whatever you wish to do. As I said, the thing which Susie and I are trying to help ourselves and others think about is how Christianity and sport fit together. You'll see that there's a book up the back which is on that very topic, which I wrote and Susie's part of as well. I don't care if none of them get sold, but if any of you would like to buy some, that'd be wonderful as well. And they're at a discount price tonight for $10. The publisher said that a box of them for 10. If you buy them at Coorong, they're probably about 18. If you buy them out of the boot of my car, they're 15. If you buy them elsewhere, I think they're probably 20. But tonight, yes, tonight for one night only, $10. So have a look at that if you're interested. I've got the chapter headings on the back of that sheet. And if you're sort of thinking about it, we're going to hear a bit more about that in a few moments. But we're going to have a break now, and we'll probably reconvene in about 10.
All right, everyone, if you want to take a seat, and we'll get started in our second half. Over to you guys.
Thank you.
And throw in any left field ones you like, I don't mind.
That's right. You say something, I'll see if I can pick it up. Well, welcome back, everyone. As many of you know, I have heard tonight, Stephen Liggins wrote a book recently called The Good Sporting Life. So I'm just going to ask him a few questions about his book and also his background. So, Stephen, I'm aware that you played sport at a fairly serious level yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I wasn't playing at Susie's level. When I was in high school, I played pretty well every sport I could possibly think of. I don't think I had a single week in year 11 where I had a full week of school without getting out of class to go and play, sport. My main sports were cricket, soccer, rugby league and athletics. And when I got to the end of high school, I could have pursued cricket, athletics or rugby league potentially seriously. I decided to pursue cricket and my great ambition as a young man was to become a professional cricketer. I'd played state under 16s, state under 19s. So my peers were people like Stephen, Mark Warren, Mark Taylor. If any of you follow cricket and heard of those sorts of guys, they were sort of my peers and sort of friends of mine. And so this is them, this is me, they're improving, and then I sort of started to get injured a few times. They kept improving, they made the Australian team, and I didn't get there. So I almost became a professional cricketer, but not quite. I think a combination of a few things, one of which was I kept injuring a muscle in my leg, kept restraining it and that sort of thing. But then I played cricket just for fun, played first grade cricket for Sydney, in the Sydney comp up until I was about 31. I played my first grade game, I pushed a guy called Tony Gregg uppishly for 2. He was an English Test cricketer. My last season I got Michael Slater, who's now a commentator, out with a bouncer. And there's a whole lot of stuff in between which was both good and bad. And then these days I just do a bit of jogging very poorly. I'm a really ordinary jogger. In fact, there's a lady from church, when I was training for a half marathon a few years ago, I just looked like I'm dying. And she kept driving past me and sort of thinking, oh, there's poor Mr. Liggins. I wonder if I should offer him a lift. That's what I look like when I'm jogging. And I do a bit of masters athletics, throwing the shot put, discus, javelin, hammer. There we go.
Very involved.
Visual demonstrations. Yeah.
Well, you obviously, you wrote a book about sport. You obviously like sport. Can you tell us what it is you like about sport?
Yeah, it's not often that we actually put in, if you do like sport, it's not often that you actually put into words what you like about it, but I guess I like the physical challenge of it, I like the physicality of it, I like pushing myself, I like playing in a team, I like being part of a team which is functioning well when it's functioning well. I made a lot of good friends through sport. I still have friends through sport. Some of my best friends I've made through playing sport. There's a lot of, I think, good Christian things which can be achieved through sport, which we'll perhaps get onto later, I guess. So yeah, just all those things, the physicality, friendships, health, fitness, all those sorts of things. And a lot of people like it. I was asking one of my friends at work who I work with at church, and I sort of said, what are some of your happy memories of sport? And no matter who you talk to, they go, oh yeah, the under 16, we made the grand final in the rugby league, and he's transported back to when he's a 15-year-old kid playing in a rugby league grand final, Northern Beaches 25 years ago, but it still is a happy memory for him, and I think it has so many happy associations.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Stephen, these days you're a minister and a lecturer as well, so why did you feel you needed to write a book about Christianity and sport?
Yeah, okay, so the book which is up the back there, I like, obviously I love God, I really like sport, and I also like writing. Writing is one of my hobbies, and so a number of years ago I thought there are various things I could write about, and I thought, well, what do Christians need books on, which hasn't been written? Now, I do a bit of lecturing and evangelism, but why would you buy a book on evangelism by Stephen Liggins when you can go and buy one by, I don't know, John Dixon or Rico Tice or some John Chapman or some famous person? But I thought, there isn't a lot of stuff which helps Christians think about sport Christianly. Sport is huge in our culture, and there's not a lot of way. I think for a lot of people who are Christians who play sport, their Christian life is here, and their sporting life is over there, and often they don't really interact at all. I was talking to a gentleman in England a number of years ago who went on to run a big sports ministry over there, and he said that when he was a young kid playing cricket, he was a Christian, and he was a keen cricketer, and he said he felt he couldn't see how they meshed together at all, and that sport was something like he did with his time off from God. And isn't that nice that God gives me a bit of time off to go and play sport? It was quite separate. So one thing I'm keen on is that, and I think what this whole Christianity and Culture series you're doing is supposed to be encouraging, is how is sport, which is a big part of many people's lives in Australian culture, how has that become part of someone's Christian life? How do we think about sport Christianly?
So what are some of the key things, aside from that you think Christians who are involved in sport need to know?
Okay, well, I think it's good to know what God thinks of sport. I would say that sport has both intrinsic merit and instrumental benefits. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Intrinsic benefit is good in and of itself. It's fun, it's enjoyable, it's a good release, it's a good outlet, it's engaging. God gives us, look, we know that our world is a fallen world, we live in a ruined masterpiece, but there are many wonderful things in the world. God has given the world to us as a gift to enjoy many of the things in it and the things that we can create from it, like sport, music, literature, architecture, whatever you're into. And so sport is a good gift from God, and I think when we play it and we just enjoy it and we thank God for it, it's an intrinsically good thing which we can thank God for. But having said that, though, there's also, I think, a lot of really good things which can be achieved through sport. So I think playing sport as a Christian can help you to rely on God as you're coping with good things and bad things. I think sport can be good for character. Sport is clearly good for fitness a lot of the time. Sport is great for relationships. Some of my best friends, and perhaps some of your best friends, are from sport. As a Christian, I was always very keen to think, well, if I like all these guys I'm playing sport with, and sometimes ladies I was playing with as well, or against, or whatever, the ones who are Christians, how can I encourage them? How can I witness to those who don't know Him? And I think when you view it that way, that sport has a whole lot is good in and of itself. There's a lot of good things which can be achieved through it. And so I'd like Christians to know that. Do you want me to keep going on?
Oh, no, that's great.
Okay, right, yeah, I can say more.
Well, as a Christian yourself, being in a predominantly un-Christian environment in sport, how did you find, what did you find challenging?
Well, I mean, most of the people I played sport with weren't Christian believers. So when I was playing first grade cricket, which is the level below Sheffield Shield cricket, so that your local team here is Sutherland Club. We used to play Sutherland every season. I think in my cricket clubs of about 60 players, I think for most of the time when I was playing grade cricket, I was the only Christian that I was aware of out of those 60 players. Having said that, some of those guys are some of my best friends, but it was a really strongly non-Christian culture, I guess. So one of the teams I played with, I won't say which was a really good team, really good bunch of blokes. Our team mascot was I think a hardcore porn magazine. And the idea was when you made the team, you were supposed to pay homage to the magazine, look through it and stuff. I never did. And whenever guys got into the team, I was like, you don't have to do it. I didn't. You don't have to look at that. But that was just part of the culture. How did I find that? I think I was helped greatly by my church. So I went to a good church growing up, Christchurch St Ives up on the North Shore. It's probably a similar sort of church to this. I was convinced that following Jesus was by far the better way. It was better than any other alternative, that I had the better deal by being a Christian than I'm not being a Christian. And so I think by being convinced of that, and like yourself, Susie, I was always keen to try and read my Bible and pray and to keep my devotional life going, and always regular fellowship at church and doing these sorts of things like you guys are doing. I think that just kept me close to God, such that I think most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, I was able to be perhaps more of a influence on my peers than have them influence at me negatively. Although I won't say I was perfect. I can think of one or two things I did which I think, you idiot. Yeah,
no, definitely. So in relation to the relationships you're talking about there, how did you manage to do any kind of outreach or evangelism in those relationships? Did you
yeah, so pretty much from when I was about 17 or 18, or probably even 16 or 17 or 18 onwards, I was very conscious of the fact that I was a Christian, I was an ambassador for Christ, and that I wanted to be an example of a Christian, but also look for conversations. And so for a lot of the time when I was playing sport, I'd pray that, God, if you want me to speak to anyone today about, anything spiritual, please open up these conversations. And sometimes that would happen. I remember once I went to a game once, I was fired up, I was praying. We started the game. First ball I bowled, catch was dropped off my bowling. Second ball I bowled, LBW appeal turned down. And then I went for 1 for 100, and my mood just got really filthy. And I went home that day and thought, God has not crossed my mind. I got so it wasn't always great, but often if people knew you were a Christian, they'd come up and speak to you about things. So I remember one guy, his marriage broke up, and he came up to me and just said, Ligo, what's it all about? I remember one other guy who has gone on to become quite a famous cricketer, similarly come up to me and say, what's it all about? And the reason why I assume they asked me was because they perceived I had as a Christian, I had something to say about it. Yeah. One year when I was playing, I played soccer in my off season, and one season I played with a mate of mine from church, so there were 2 of us who were in the team who were Christians. So we thought, why don't we run a Christianity Explained course and invite all our friends, all the soccer teams, the 2 teams to it, which we thought was a great idea, but it frightened the living daylights out of us, because we were all about 21 or 22 at the time. So we thought, right, we'll do it. It's actually George Stathios, if you know. George, yeah. So we wrote, this is back before email, sorry, but we wrote everyone on the team a letter, invited them along, and it was nerve-wracking when I turned up to play soccer the following weekend, because you had every reaction from, oh yeah, I'll come, through to, go away. We had about 4 or 5 guys came along in the end, and since then one of the guys has become a Christian, so that's nice.
Yeah,
and a number of years later I did the same thing with the Gordon District Cricket Club as well. So, if you have a bit of credibility with people, because you played sport with them for years, you sometimes can do things which are a bit more direct.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that, and I picked up on the initial thing you said there about people coming to ask you questions, and you don't necessarily know that they know that you're a Christian or that they're watching, but people do pick up on that quite quickly when they see anything different in your life or in your language or whatever it is, that you don't recognise it, but then you suddenly are shocked that they're asking you questions, because people are watching, because they are without even knowing, looking for alternatives.
I think if you're a person playing sport in a team with mainly non-Christians, without you realising it, you're probably an unofficial chaplain to that team. If you're living as a Christian, they will often turn to you in moments of crisis.
And it may take a little while, but it's surprising how much impact that can have. So sport then and spiritual encouragement, how do you see those two aligned?
Well, I think that one of the great things about playing sport with and against people is if you're out on the field, suffering together, striving together, it creates quite a bond, at least I feel it does anyway. So you can form quite significant relationships. And once again, if you're with non-Christians, you're thinking, how can I be a good ambassador for Christ? But when you're with Christians, you can have really good relationships with other believers. So let me just give perhaps 2 examples. I made my high school cricket team when I was in year 8, and all the guys were much older than me, a scaled down version of, I guess, you playing for Australia as a 17-year-old with 2-year-olds. And I was nervous because I was a little year 7 kid with all these year 11 and 12 guys. I'm a Christian, I didn't think many of them were, but there was one other guy in the team who was 2 years older than me who went to the same church as me. And I found it massively comforting to know that, boy, if I get myself into trouble here, Stuart's going to be here, he'll help me out because he's from church, he's a Christian. And so I think it can be really great if you find yourself in a team or in a club or in any situation where you're perhaps an older Christian or you're just another Christian there. It can be really just encouraging and helpful for other people who you're playing with or against. And then I noticed a number of years ago, about 5 years back, I played a season for our church's soccer team, which was good fun, except I kept going to the physiotherapist every 3rd game. It's a product of age. But it's interesting, just playing with a bunch of the guys from night church. I talked to them in church on Sundays, we played sport on Saturdays, and the rate at which our relationship just increased because we played sport together was wonderful, it was great. Yeah.
You speak in your book a little bit about some of the dangers that can be associated with sport or Christians in sport. What do you think some of those are?
Yeah, look, I think the dangers you can probably guess at, but I sort of think there are 2 areas which we need to be on our guard for, which is, once again, 2 things starting with the letter I, idolatry and immorality. So one of the dangers for sports people, particularly if they take it pretty seriously, as I tried to, is idolatry. And idolatry is where you take a good thing, like sport or music or whatever it is, and turn it into a God thing. And that is always the temptation if you're really into sport or taking it seriously. In my book, I've got a quote from an American athlete who subsequently became a Christian, but he said that when he was running, and I think he came second at the Olympic Games a number of years back, he said in effect sport was his God. It was his idol. He worshipped it. That's what was his reason for existence. He said it made a lousy God and a lousy idol in the end, but that's a danger. And that's also a danger for sports fans as well. You know, a lot of us like following. You probably follow the Sharks, I guess, or many of you would follow the Sharks. It's nice to follow a team. I follow the Rabbitohs. But sometimes it's good fun, but sometimes people get overly obsessed with being a fan. And so you see some of this footage of fans overseas and how ridiculously over-involved they get. I heard a story of a couple from the United States who missed their daughter's wedding because it clashed with a big game they wanted to watch. And they said, when asked about it, well, look, we told them not to get married on that date because, you know, so-and-so was playing so-and-so, and we did get there for the reception. And you sort of think, wow, that's someone who's... So the idolatry. The other danger is immorality, and I guess there's on the field and off the field. So you can play, you can cheat, you can be a dirty player. I don't know how wide... Okay, I've sometimes played sport with a few people who were Christians, and I've sort of thought, really? You know, I mean, their behaviour wasn't really consistent with it. So there's that sort of danger. There's also the danger of immorality, you know, off the field, like, you know, the things I mainly come up against most of the time were alcohol and drugs and pornography and forming inappropriate relationships with women before I was married to them and, you know, all that sort of thing. So I'm sure, but you can face that sort of thing in any area, whether it's work or whatever. So you've got that as well. And so I think the thing to do is just to be aware of the opportunities, aware of the dangers, and sort of take those into account.
Yeah. In your book, you also talk a little bit about the historical background of Christianity in sport. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, this is interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. I'm just telling you that it's interesting so you know how to respond. Are you interested? But sport as we know it today, like organised team sport and competitions and stuff, it really developed, as I understand it, in England, the United Kingdom, in the 19th century, you know, the 1800s. And so around about 1840, 1850, 1860, people were starting to form soccer teams and cricket teams and athletics teams and forming clubs and this sort of thing. And sport really took off as we know it then. And there were two groups who really promoted sport at the time in England, and they were the English the public schools, which are like our private schools, you know, Eton and Harrow and all these sorts of things, and the churches. Now, the reason why the schools and the churches thought that organised sport was good for two reasons. One, they felt it was good for character development and character building. They also thought it was good for community building as well. With the Industrial Revolution, people had a day off and they needed to do something other than get drunk. Sport was a good thing. But also with the churches, they also saw that sport was a good opportunity for outreach as well. So from the church's perspective, sport then was good for character, good for community, good for outreach. Now, as the last 170 years have gone by, sport has developed. People have sometimes taken it very, 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 very seriously. It's been associated with gambling. There's the whole issue of sport on Sundays, which was a big issue a number of years back. And so there's sometimes been a bit of a hot and cold relationship between the churches and sport. But I think it's interesting to know that churches and sport were originally very closely linked together. And I guess one of the things I would like to see happen is that to be the truth and the case today, that the churches and sport can be productively linked together in a really positive, useful way. Having said that, though, that's not everyone's experience. My experience of church life has been genuinely encouraging of my sport. I was talking to a gentleman over in England, who I know, who was a professional football player, as in soccer player over in England, and he was playing professional soccer and he got converted at the age of 21. And then he went along to this church, and there's an older Christian gentleman took him aside and said, "Oh, it's great that you're a Christian now, so you won't be wanting to worry about with all this soccer stuff anymore, will you?" He assumed that because he'd become a Christian, he'd put aside childish things. And this guy, who was a professional soccer player at the time, was pretty devastated. I don't think it was good advice. This situation, unfortunately, there was another older guy at the church who encouraged him to be a Christian and to be a Christian while playing professional soccer as a job. So, you know, I don't know what your experiences are, but there can be a bit of both, but I think it can be really good.
Yep, no, definitely. We need Christians in every arena of life.
Hmm.
Well, I'm going to hand it over to the floor now. I don't know if I can prolong the question that you did as far
What we
as
could- I
asking
could help
whether
you.
anyone has any questions. You can help if you want. But does anyone have any questions or is thinking about questions and wants a bit of time to ponder? Good job.
Yeah.
What goes on tour stays on tour. That kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, there's sometimes a white line you can cross on the sporting field. Apparently, what happens in the field stays in the field, etc. I personally think that the white line is not a good way to think as a Christian. I think you should be able to go out onto the field or the court or track or whatever it is, or into the pool, and play as hard as you. I mean, if it's a social game of sport, that's one thing. But if it's a serious game of sport, genuine competition, two evenly matched teams, I think you go out and play hard and fair inside the rules. But I don't think you cheat, and I don't think you use hatred as a motivator. So when I say I played a little bit of rugby league in high school, I was a forward. I liked nothing more than getting a ball and just ploughing into a bunch of other blokes and trying to knock them out of the way. It was great fun, but I didn't actually hate them. I just sort of thought, this is a competitive game of sport, let's, go for it. Now, I think some people have the capacity to play highly competitive sport and to keep their heads. I think some people just go almost semi-insane. They can get really hyped up. I think that's a little bit of a problem as a Christian. I think you should just play hard and fair. That's what I say about on the sporting field. In terms of what goes on tour stays on tour, what a big load of absolute rubbish. I think wherever we are, we've got to be ambassadors for Christ. Is it always easy to be an ambassador for Christ? Not always, but I guess it depends on, I felt, and I hope I wasn't overconfident, but I felt because I had a pretty solid relationship with God and I was convinced that God's way was best, I was never greatly tempted to get drunk or form inappropriate relationships on the spur of the moment, or anything like that. But I guess if I had a weakness for that, I'd probably need to stay away from those sorts of situations. Is that helpful? Yeah, please. Yep. Yep. Yeah. You can just sort of say, look, I love you, but I think you're breaking the rules. I know. Look, Matt, perhaps you might want to say something on that in a minute.
It's funny because as you said that, when you were asking the question before, I had a particular instant of playing against a particular player who was hitting me the back of the neck with their stick, like defending me, but only obviously when no one was looking around, just repeatedly. And this was someone I played with in the national team, and then this was in the sort of state environment. And it was so hard to work out how do you, one, stay committed to the task that you're on the field for, which is, to defeat that player and to, for me, get around that defender kind of thing. And two, how do you, what do you say to them? And I just remember just turning around just going, really? Really? Is this where we're at? And I remember she laughed at me. And then I think the fact that they're baiting you. Baiting is one of the most powerful ways I think that sledging occurs because they just want you to respond. And if you actually hold your ground and you don't respond, it's sort of the silent higher ground. And I know that's not an easy answer, but I think it is the most powerful. And by not responding in the way I think she wanted a response, it meant that it didn't happen again. So for whatever, but I don't know if that answers it. I know it's really hard.
I actually write a little bit about aggression in my book.
Yeah.
Look, I've lost my temper on a number of occasions over the years, but it wasn't regular. So I think that we've got to give ourselves a bit of leeway. None of us are perfect. Hit your finger with a hammer, you could lose your temper. I think if it's happening week after week after week that you're losing your temper, I think then you've got to either take some sort of serious action. But we just do our best to be Christian when we're getting fouled repeatedly. I guess that's what I'd say. You've got to just try and be Christian about it. Yeah, but it's not always easy. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, over there.
Yep. Okay, I think that's a really interesting question.
Do you want to repeat it?
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. The question is, what do we do about sports where we know it's really damaging the person's health? Like American football, we know people develop brain injuries and have horrible effects when they're 40 and 50 and such forth. That's a very good question. And I think that some sports are inherently based on violence. So I don't personally like sports which are just based on violence. And so I think I just don't want to watch those. Sports which have, that's just my opinion. This isn't, I can't point to a Bible verse which categorically says that. So, come back at me later if you'd like to and, think about it. But I think a lot of sports range from the entirely safe to the slightly more dangerous. So if you're into rock climbing, or if you're playing soccer or rugby, slightly more dangerous than if you're a jogger or a swimmer. I mean, you can injure yourself, pulling muscles, but it's a different sort of thing. So I think it's a bit of a sliding scale. My personal opinion, and this is just my opinion, is if the physicality of it is just an aspect of the sport, but not the point of the sport, it doesn't really bother me over much, unless it gets to the point of being genuinely bad for your health. So what is genuinely bad for your health? I have a sort of rule which I think, would I want my kids to play it? So I'd probably be happy for my kids to play, soccer, netball, rugby, basketball, hockey. I probably wouldn't, this is just me, I probably wouldn't want my kids to play NFL at a high level. So I probably wouldn't be that into watching it. But that's a tricky one, and that's just my best effort at having a go at that. I'd like boxing if you couldn't get hurt, because I like the tactics of it. It's man on man or person on person, it's tactical, you've got to use your skill, your stamina, your strength, that sort of thing. But, I think you're going to get your head knocked around too much for my liking, so I'd choose not to watch it, but that's just my view.
Yes, at the back. When you say represented you badly, do you want to clarify?
Do you want to repeat the question? You don't.
Yes, so essentially, have you ever been in a situation where other members of your team have sort of put in jeopardy your Christian values, or have made you, you've been challenged to keep them when they're not keeping them, essentially? Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want to go?
You go.
Well, I think I gave a situation then. I think, like I said, there was a lot of kind of moral instances where people were having relationships with all sorts of people, and you're kind of encouraged to be part of that. And being a young member of the team, there's always that element of, you need to be initiated into this environment, you need to be initiated into the alcohol consumption and things like that, that were ways in which, I was challenged. I'm just trying to think what else. I guess also for me being a young player and having lots of older players there, I was kind of quite challenged by the way that you kind of saw two different versions of people who were, women who were kind of in their 30s I was playing with were some really, really supportive of a young person and would encourage and kind of try and protect you in a way from some of that culture, even if they weren't Christians as well. They're trying to protect you from that and sort of keeping you away from certain men or things like that. But then there were others who kind of just showed you this other side, who were kind of perversely trying to push you down decisions that they had made, that they almost wanted you to make, so that you were part of the same problems that they sort of encountered. So, and then they don't necessarily like it when you don't make those decisions, because, it's a challenge, for sure.
I mean, all of the guys I played sport with pretty much had quite different lifestyles to me, but we got on well together most of the time. Often they would bait me to see what I would do about various things, and it usually had to do with sex, and it usually had to do with alcohol or drugs or something like that. I had an interesting experience. When I was 20, I went over to London and played a season for a London club side, a thing called the Middlesex League, and there was a guy in my team who was dating a reasonably famous Australian actress at the time, but I don't think it was the first relationship he'd ever had, if you know what I mean. And he's going, so Ligo, because that was me, Ligo, you're not going to have sex till you get married, you reckon? I said, yeah, no, I'm not. And I thought he was going to absolutely lambast me. And he sort of went, wow. Like he would actually, I think he thought, gee, I almost wish that had been me. And I thought that, I just hadn't expected that. I thought he was just going to say, you idiot, you're missing out on so much, various other things he might have said. But I almost got the impression he sort of thought, wow, maybe it would have been better if I'd lived that way, which absolutely shocked the socks off me because I wasn't expecting that from this guy. But often I get baited, but it doesn't mean they think you're an idiot. They might just be baiting you to see what you'll do.
Yeah, or to see how committed you actually are to
Yeah.
what you believe.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, do you want to repeat the question? Yeah.
Really good question, ahead of your time. Thinking about having, I guess, the complications of Sundays in sport and how a lot of sports are on Sundays and things, and having potentially children, would you put them in sort of sport on Sundays and having that conflict perhaps with church involvement, and also the element of Christians intermingling, I think that you said, with non-Christians and being part of a, wider witnesses within the community. Yeah.
I'll kind of address, there are two things there. There's the Sunday and who do you play with. I'll go to the second one first. I think there are good reasons to play either with Christians or in just a normal suburban team. If you play in a suburban team and your kids are Christians, or if you're a Christian, you've got the opportunity to be an ambassador for Christ. Now, how you will go or how your kids will go as ambassadors for Christ is another matter, so I guess you'd have to assess that. Are you likely to more affect them, or are they more likely to affect you? I got really psyched up as a Christian by playing with people who weren't believers. I felt I had a solid base at my church, I had a solid relationship with God, and I just wanted to talk to people about my faith. And so I liked that. I didn't want to play with Christians predominantly. Although having one or two other Christians at the club was a massive help on those occasions where that occurred. Having said that, like I said, it's great fun. Perhaps if there are all sorts of good reasons for playing with other Christians as well. You're not so much doing outreach there as encouraging each other, and that's good fun too. So I think they're both good. It's just a personal preference, I'd say.
And if they go on to further, they're more likely going to be playing with a wider community than just Christians.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
In terms of the playing sport on Sunday, as I said, I've written a bit about that in my book, and I've got to do best if I just read out the few pages. But is there anything in the Bible which says you can't play sport on Sundays? No. Is there anything in the Bible which says you have to go to church on Sundays? Not really, no. There's an awful lot in the Bible which says you must be in regular fellowship with people and meet with Christians regularly all the time. And throughout pretty much all of history, from right back from the first century, Christians were meeting together on Sundays. It's what we've done for 2,000 years. And it's by far the most convenient and most efficient way to meet with other Christians. So my view would be, I would be very nervous of playing any sport which interfered with that. However, there may be, if someone can say there's a really good kingdom of God reason for me to play sport on Sundays, and I'm going to get my regular Christian fellowship in some other way, and I'm going to still be involved in Christian ministry in some other way, like a lot of professional sports people face this issue. They're travelling away from home all the time and that sort of thing. If someone says there's a good kingdom of God reason for me to do it, then I'm comfortable with it, as long as they're still meeting regularly with Christians and they're still involved in some sort of Christian ministry as best they can be. So the situation, you might share something in a minute, but when I was growing up, most sport of my cricket was played on Saturday, and I had some Sunday games. But by the time I was playing every third Sunday, I was going to night church. And so as soon as the game finished, I was just bolting out of the ground, and I'd always get to church. And everyone knew, why aren't you sticking around, Ligo? Well, I'm off to church. Oh, really? Okay, that. So the most important thing by far is our relationship with God. And when it comes to our kids, I want my kids to grow up Christians. I don't want them to grow up representing Australia. If they can do both, great. But I sometimes wonder, because I'm a church minister, whether sometimes parents prioritise their kids' sport over their kids' involvement with, Sunday school or youth group or something like that. Now, I don't want to generalise, but I think you've just got to have your priorities right. And if you're not going to be in church because of sport on Sundays, I think you need to have a genuine reason. And the best thing I think to do would be to talk to some older Christians and perhaps discuss it with your pastor or something like that, Tim or Nicole or whatever. So I don't think there's a rule, but I think we need to be cautious and wise. Sorry, what do you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had a lot of sport on Sundays, particularly once it got past the sort of club level. Most of the sort of Sydney leagues men were on Saturdays and women were on Sundays. So I sort of was very much confronted with that choice or decision. But in saying that, I think churches are incredible these days. There's so many services. I mean, for me, it was often Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening games. So it meant for me that I had to get up and go to church at 9 a.m. And my parents sort of really encouraged that and made sure that was a commitment that we made. And that was a wonderful blessing to have that. But I don't really feel there's many excuses these days with the amount of opportunities churches give to be part of a community for you to have sport. I mean, there's not many sports that, cricket obviously goes for a lot longer, but there's not many sports that you have to be there for 10 hours of the day that you can't find a time on a Sunday to actually go to a service, even if it's at a different church or something, or you go to a church where you can be part of the service. Being international, it was a lot harder. I was often travelling and on tour and things, and that created its own challenges, but that's sort of a bit of a separate issue.
Just on the high level, there are now sports chaplains associated with lots of teams. So I was talking to an English Premier League football player who gets to church when he can, but there's a club chaplain who's a genuine evangelical Christian, and they meet and pray for each other in the team. And apparently a number of guys at the Portsmouth Football Club back in the early noughties were Christians or became Christians. So that's encouraging, I think.
I remember going to a few random churches around the world, like in Athens and a Greek Orthodox place, just because I could walk into somewhere and I had a few hours off, and that was, amazing encouragement from seeing international Christians around the world too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, great question. So I'll just repeat it. Essentially, and apologies if I get this wrong, but we've talked about Christians and playing with non-Christians, but as playing with someone who's a Christian and seeing their faith perhaps they're not witnessing it on the field, for example. Is that more what you meant, or that they leave it at the door kind of thing? How do we walk alongside them as Christians?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it really depends on our relationship with them. So if they're a good friend of mine and we respect each other, I'd probably want to know, does this other person think there's a problem? Like, if they think, yeah, look, I shouldn't behave like that, I just struggle with it a lot, great. Then you can say, right, why don't we pray about it, let's work on it together and, keep playing well, but, let's try and see if I can help you here. That's if the person's got a good relationship with you and they recognise there's a problem. If they think, oh, shut up, you idiot, it's fine, don't worry about it, that person probably needs a bit of general spiritual encouragement, generally. And I don't know how I'd go dealing with someone who sort of said, oh, shut up, leave me alone, that's okay, it's on the field. That suggests to me that person hasn't really thought much about how sport and Christianity interact. Whether you're the person then to help that sort of person, I don't know, but you always go better if someone you respect is helping you with something rather you find hard. So I think if you sort of thought maybe I'm not the person to help this person, if we're talking about anyone in particular, you might sort of think, who could help this person? Oh, he respects his youth group leader or Bible study leader or the Tim or whoever. Maybe Tim or someone can do something for them. But I think a lot of it is so much depends on relationships. But also, one's good example can also send out a message. What do you think, Susie?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Continue being a witness for what you can be as a Christian, and don't discount the fact that they will see that, and they will start to compare their own, even if it doesn't look like that's the case. If you're not really close with them and you can't confront them in that way, or you wouldn't want to confront them, be a friend to them and show them another way. Any other questions? Yes.
Talked about when sports started and church kind of got integrated
So what should the churches be doing to integrate into sport more, perhaps? Yeah.
What can the churches do to integrate sport more? One, put on seminars like this. Two, promote books like this. Three, get Susie to come and speak to you or something. So I think churches, want to encourage Christians to be Christians in all areas of their life, and so I think helping people to think about it Christianly is a really important thing. Another thing is that churches can serve a good role by having church soccer teams and netball teams and things like that. That can be a really helpful thing to do, and then make sure that the culture of those teams are Christian. Not perfect, but Christian. There are probably some horrible church football teams around aren't doing much good. I think I don't know whether there are any really elite level sports people at this church, but if there are a few who are playing for the Sharks or international triathletes or something like that, their schedules are very different. They're like a shift worker on steroids. They're just all over the place in terms of when they can get to things and that sort of stuff. And I think a church can do a great job by figuring out how they can help support those people when they're away from home, missing out on things. Perhaps someone might meet together with them one-on-one. I know a church in England, which I know the minister at, and there's one of England's best athletes, a lady, is at their church. And she meets up regularly one-on-one with one of the ladies from the church who has no particular interest in sport, but this other lady is flexible to meet with her when she's back in the country and she'll ring her up. So I think you can do a lot of those sorts of things too. Yep.
Great. Any more final questions on the floor?
I just noticed we've just cleared 9:05, so probably we should tie it up there.
Do you want to tie it up?
Nicole, do you want to tie it up? Why don't you? Because you have authority here and you're an important person.
I would just tie it up by saying thank you so much to Stephen and Susie. Can we please give them a round of applause to show our thanks? Really helpful to think about just how our faith hits all parts of life and lots of the ways that you answer those questions, lots of the things I was thinking about. I thought this could be an answer. This could be a question I could ask about lots of areas of life, not just sport. So really, really valuable. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. You can still buy books after this.
Yeah, can I say, don't feel any pressure to, but,
There's also a book Stephen's written on travel as well. That's up the back.
You can say that into the microphone if you want to.
Sorry, is it good?
Susie says it's good. You can hang around, have a chat for a little bit. But thanks to these guys, I might just pray to finish this up. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for the gospel. Thank you that you sent your son to give his life for us so that we might have life to the full. Lord, thank you that while we wait for his return, we get to live lives in him and for you now, and that looks like our whole life being transformed as we become more like him and live for you. Lord, thank you for the privilege of spending time tonight thinking about what that means in the sport that we play. Lord, we pray that you would continue to transform us, to be more like Christ in the way that we play sport, in the way that we love those that we play with, in the way that we think about how we use that time to rest and enjoy the bodies you have given us, Lord. But we pray that, this would have been really helpful in thinking through what it looks like in all of life to live for you. So please, by your Spirit, help us to live for you in sport and in our day-to-day. Thank you for Stephen and Susie. Thank you for the ways that you've worked in their life and the wisdom they've been able to share with us tonight, Lord. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thanks. Thanks for joining us, guys.